What's up guys, it's Sam at Cycle Technology. Keep watching this video if you want to learn step by step how to set up tubeless without failure. You will need tubeless tape that is the correct width for your rim. It wants to be able to sit just flush inside the rim or possibly just over as well. That's fine too, but too thin and I wouldn't recommend it. Scissors to cut the tape when it's done, a tubeless valve or two if you're doing both, tyre lever, valve core remover, and I'll explain why we might need that in a bit. That is to just prick a little hole in the tape before we put the valve through it. I've got a syringe, that's not absolutely necessary, but it makes it easier to get your sealant into the tyre, and a couple of rags, one clean, one dirty, some brake cleaner as well to clean the inside of the rim before installing the tape, very important step, and either a compressor or a flash charger like boost pump, one of those pumps that you pump it up and fills the canister with lots of pressure and you can release it all in one go. All of these things I find are the best things to have to get a proper tubeless setup. Let's get into it. So step one, I'm going to take the tyre off and get rid of the tubeless tape that's already on this rim and give it a good clean. The reason we're redoing this is because it has failed because it wasn't done properly the first time around. Worth noting as well, the tyre that you're using for a tubeless setup needs to be tubeless ready, as does the rim. There has been some success of people setting up non-tubeless rims as a tubeless setup, but I personally won't touch them, I won't go near them because my experience is that they always fail later down the line and they always end up going back to putting tubes in anyway. So tubeless ready wheel, tubeless ready tyre, let's go. That is not a true representation of how easily these things usually come off. It usually takes a lot more effort than that. If you are struggling to get your tyre off, make sure that the bead is sat in the valley of the rim all the way around, and it'll give you as much slack as you need to be able to get that tyre lever in there and start working the tyre off. I'm going to find the edge of the tape and just start peeling it off. Notice there's no point in me cleaning it at this stage because I'm going to leave myself a mostly clean surface underneath. And that's the bit that I need to clean before I put the new tape on. I'm going to get my dirty rag just to take off any excess sealant that's kicking around there. Get the bulk of the stuff off, and then I'm going to switch to my clean rag on which I'm going to spray brake cleaner. This is, I think it's called isopropyl alcohol. Basically pure rubbing alcohol, and it evaporates really quickly and doesn't leave any residue behind once you've finished cleaning whatever it is that you're cleaning. In this case, obviously, it's the inside of the rim. I want this surface to be as clean and dry as possible, and it will give the tape its best chance of adhesion and best chance of sealing and staying sealed over time. I do this from one side and I turn the rim over and I work it right into the corners as well, where the edges of the rim are, where the bead would usually sit, making sure to leave no bit untouched, because when tubeless systems failed, it's usually because this part hasn't been done thoroughly, in my experience. Clean rim. So I'm going to start taping in a minute. As I mentioned, I want my tape to be as wide as, or even just a little bit wider than the rim, because that's fine, because it'll sit into the valley of the rim when I pull it tight. If it's way too thin, there's a chance that air and sealant might be able to escape through the valve holes. So I want a rim tape that's about the same width as my rim. Best to measure it before you buy it. I take my gloves off for this bit because I don't want any contaminants from my gloves, any oil or grease or anything that might be on there. I want to use bare clean hands, and I'm going to find my valve hole, and I'm going to go, doesn't really matter, but you know, 3 or 4 spokes past the valve hole. That's when I'm going to start doing my wrapping, and I'm going to go and then all the way around past where I started, and then go about 3 or 4 spoke holes, sorry, past where I started, past where the valve is, just so there's a nice bit of overlap. It's important, I want to make sure that my first bit of tape is properly stuck down right in the centre before I start feeding it round and pulling tight on it. I want to rub this down as best I can and make sure it's really well stuck there, and then I'm going to pin it with my thumb and put tension on that tape as I start to pull it really tight and lay it down in the centre of the rim. And it doesn't matter if I go a little bit to the side, because I can always back it off and just line it up and put it back, but I just want it to be as centered as possible And then I'm going to move my way around. You can hear how much tension I've got on the tape. I find this is the best practice. Some people do it slack and I find that they tend to fail. I always do it tight on my tubeless setups. I don't remember the last time one failed. When I first was learning it, some did fail, but I've since learned how to stop that from happening. Continuing to push the tape down as I lay it, making sure I've got a nice adhesion everywhere. I think that's a real word. But it just doesn't sound right in my brain, so sorry if I just made a word up. Adhesion's a real word, right? It's gotta be. Makes sense. Keep sticking it down all the way. And I'm coming back round now to where I started. And like I said, I'm just gonna go straight past that. And find my valve hole. 3 or 4 spoke holes past there. That's where I'm going to cut my tape off. Some people always cut this off at an angle. Personally, I don't understand why they do that. It doesn't seem to make a blind bit of difference. I never struggle to find the end of the tape. It doesn't seem to do anything, so just cut it off where you want it, basically. Now I'm just going to use my rag again rather than the end of my finger, because it makes a much better tool for making sure that this tape is sat down flat everywhere. Using my fingertips and my fingernails to just force it right into the edges. And I'm just working some air bubbles where the tape is overlapped from here to here. There's a few little air bubbles. I don't think they're of any real consequence, but I always just work them right to the edge, like when you're putting a screen protector on your phone. I do that from one side and I go to the other and do the same again, so I can get right in to the corner of the rim where the bead's going to sit. I want to make sure that all of this is sat well, because if sealant and air is going to escape from anywhere, it's going to be from the edges where the tape meets the bead. If there's a gap anywhere down there, that is where the air will come from. It ain't going to come from the middle where it's solid plastic, so it's the edges that I need to make sure I've got right. So that is the rim fully taped. Like I said, this is how I do it, and when I set up tubeless for customers, they don't come back saying it's leaking air afterwards. This is what I figured out is the best way to do it. I was shown the basics of it when I first started doing this stuff, and I've since learned my own techniques. Don't worry about these little air bubbles that you can see in here. That is just where the spoke holes are. You can't get rid of those. There's just nothing for it to stick to there. But as long as your tape is centered and it appears to be well stuck at the edges, you're good to go. The next thing we're going to do is use this little pricker to pierce a little hole in the tape where the valve's going to go through. So sometimes you can see where the valve hole is. It looks different to all the other spoke holes, and it's easy then to find your center and just poke it through. If you can't see it, or if you've had to go, if the tape's too dark for instance and you can't see, you can go through from the other side, find the center of your valve hole and poke it up from underneath. Make sure it's in the center and just go gentle with it. If you go too fast, you can split the tape, and if you split the tape, it's all got to come off when you start again. So you want to take your time with it, with whatever you're using, and just slowly open that hole up, give it time to adjust. And the next thing I'm going to do is take the valve cap and the knurled nut and the little rubber o-ring off the valve. I'm going to close my actual Presta valve top so that it doesn't bend, and I'm just going to again slowly work that through there. Again, if I go too fast, it's liable to split. And then from the other side, I'm going to put my little o-ring back on. Not all tubeless valves have o-rings, some do, some don't. Doesn't seem to really matter. And then this is an important bit. I'm going to apply some pressure from the back of the valve using my thumb whilst I tighten this knurled nut up to there. I want it all snug together. I want to see my little rubber seal on here is sort of squished down, and it's definitely going to be filling any little gaps that air and sealant could come out of down there. It doesn't want to be super duper tight, like I wouldn't use pliers to tighten it up, because if you did have an issue on the trails and you had to fit a tube, if you had a burst tyre like a rip, then you'd struggle to get it off unless you had pliers with you. Once we've got to this stage, the next thing to do is put the tyre on, put the sealant in. Let's look how that's done. That's all good to go as far as I'm concerned. Get my tyre. Obviously I'm going to check the direction of rotation and make sure everything's rolling the right way around. If you're bothered, you might want to line up, say, the Schwalbe sign with the valve. It doesn't actually change performance at all, but some people do like it to be just so that's fine. And I'm just going to seat the bead of the tyre inside the rim, and then again, this is just what I do. I balance the rim on the tips of my toes so that it's held off the ground, and then I'm free to go down with my thumbs and work the tyre onto the rim. With some other rim and tyre combinations, this bit is a lot more difficult. You might have to get a couple of tyre levers involved, maybe even get an extra pair of hands to help you to hold it in place. Some tyres are insanely difficult to put on, to the point where we snap multiple tyre levers. Other ones like this just pop on. It just doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. Just some tyres and some rims are slightly different sizes, and that's where the difference comes from. I'm going to do the same with the bead at the other side. Now, if you don't have a syringe to put your sealant in, you might want to stop at this point, give your sealant a good shake and pour a little bit of it just to the inside of the tyre, and then I would rotate that around so that the sealant will slink down here, and then I'm going to continue popping the rest of the bead on like that all the way up to the top. Like I say, I might need a tyre lever to get that last bit on. I would hold the other end of the bead in place with my thumb and just work it on like that until it's all sat nicely. And if you do have a syringe, then the next bit that we're going to do, just give that a quick wipe, is remove the valve core. The valve core just down here, and this is what I mentioned, the valve core remover. This is to remove a Presta or a Schrader valve core. This one's a Presta. I'm going to take that valve core out, put that to one side just for a moment, whilst I shake my sealant up to get all the little sealing particles spread out around the fluid. For a tyre this size, I usually whack in about 100 mil. I find that's a decent amount for a 2.4 inch, 29 inch or 27.5 inch mountain bike tyre. I don't like mess when I'm working, so I always give this a little wipe, because otherwise it's going to end up on the rim and on my gloves. And the next thing I do to find my valve again, and this is another thing that stops it being so messy, is if I just shove that on there now and squirt sealant into it, I'm going to be also increasing the pressure inside the tyre, so when I remove this, it's going to spit a bit out at me. I always just push on the tyre to create a negative pressure inside there whilst I put the syringe on, and then squeeze it in. Less for a gravel tyre, less for a road tyre, about 100 mil for most mountain bike tyres, and maybe a little bit more than that if you've got something insanely wide like a 3-inch tyre. Give everything a little wipe. I'll come back to it and clean it properly later. Get my valve core, pop that back in. Doesn't need to be mega tight, you're just nipping it up. And now we're going to pump it up. If you're fortunate enough to have a compressor, this will be a lot easier for you. If you don't and you want to do your own tubeless stuff at home, it's worth getting something like one of these. They're not cheap, but once you've got it, you've got it, and it saves you trips down to the bike shop. This particular one has a switch on the front that when it's down, I can pump the pressure up. It's going to fill this up with up to just below 160 psi, and then when I flip that switch, it's going to dump it all out in one go. So this might work on the first go, or I might need to remove the valve core again to allow more airflow to get in, but if that happens, we'll talk about that too. It's just another tip on how to get tubeless setup done for yourself at home. You might want to fast forward this bit. Cool. So, as you can see, if you can see, we've got just below 160 psi in there. I've gone up to the green. I don't want to go into the red because that's telling me that's not where the pump wants to be. And I'm going to attach the end of the pump onto the valve. And if it throws air in here quick enough now, you'll just hear it all seat and do what it's supposed to do. If it doesn't, I'll have to pump that up again, take the valve core out, which, like I say, with the valve core out of the way, much more air can get in much quicker. So let's see how it goes. A satisfying noise, I think you'll agree. If it sounded like air was leaking out of the tyre, then it wasn't. It was coming out of the pump. I think the hose on the pump's a little bit loose, but that's by the by. It doesn't matter because it did what it was supposed to do. It sat the bead of the tubeless tyre on the rim, and what I'm looking for in this is there's usually a line right around the edge of the tyre, which you should be able to see once the bead is sat correctly. So if you're looking around, you can see that line, but then find that it dips in down here and goes below the edge of the rim, you're probably going to put a bit more pressure in it. In my experience, you can look at the maximum PSI of a tyre, whatever the manufacturer says that can be, and you can go 10 PSI beyond that. If it does blow up in your face, I won't be held responsible, but my experience is you can safely go 10 PSI beyond it just to get it sat, and then back it off from that once it's sat, okay? The other way to tell if it isn't sat properly is to give it a spin and watch the tyre, and if you see that the tread dips down, it probably means that your tyre's not sat correctly, although it could mean that the tyre's just slightly wobbly in its tread. But you should be able to tell when you have a look at it on closer inspection. So that's sat, it's got my sealant in, and the last thing I do, some people do a little dance and they shake it like this. And that's just basically splashing the sealant around inside the tyre. What we've created inside there essentially is a continuous tube of sealed air. It's got the tyre across the top, and then underneath it's got the tubeless tape. Any tiny little holes that might be anywhere, anything that just couldn't be got by the tape, will be taken care of when you give it a shake and splash that sealant around. Or the thing that I like to do, which requires less energy, is just to pop it on the floor and go like this. And that's that. I don't think there's anything else to say about it except for good luck setting your own tubeless up. And if you do this, the only other thing to bear in mind, or two things to bear in mind, is you're going to want to top your sealant up about every 6 months at the latest, because it does congeal, it does evaporate the moisture out of it, and when you do get little punctures that you probably won't notice, some of it does escape outside of the tyre. In my experience, tubeless for mountain bikes in particular is a great solution to this stuff. I do also carry a tube just in case, because if I, like I have done once, put a massive rip in my sidewall on a rock, there's nothing I can do about that. But the takeaway from it for me is that 95% of the time, little bits of thorns, glass, any time when I might have dinged my rim and maybe would have had a pinch flat with a tube, I don't even notice that stuff's happened. I just carry on riding, and then every now and then, and I mean literally once in the last 4 years, have I had to stop and put a tube into my tyre because I ripped the sidewall open. The rest of the time, I just carry on riding. That's why I love tubeless. I think it's a great setup if it's done properly. Hopefully if you follow the steps in this video, you can do it too. Thanks for watching.